Greetings and welcome to what's going to be fun. Welcome to today's Audit Tuesday. This session will be different. Yes, the topic is going to be the new administration and what will happen to regulations and cyber guidances that emanate from that place that's behind Stacey there, right? You can wave right back there. That's that little tower. I think that's the real one. That's not an amusement park one, right, Stacey? Yeah. Anyways, to guide this discussion, we have a real learned and fun panel of guests. You got Stacey Cameron, Mike Andrews, and Karina Klever. Okay, welcome, panelists.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Why don't we do some introductions? Stacey, go first. Tell a little about yourself, what you're up to, all that stuff. Yes, you first.
So I'm Stacey Cameron. I'm based in the DC metropolitan area. So I actually live and work in Maryland. And I have a background as a federal contractor. I used to work for the Department of Homeland Security. I'm currently the CISO for Halcyon, so in the private sector for a SaaS company. I've worked to help from cybersecurity perspectives to help folks in healthcare, finance, education, state, local, federal government, Department of Defense. So really from a governance, risk, and compliance standpoint and cybersecurity, I like to make sure we understand the differences. But yes, so just really aim to help people really understand what's required for them and how to make their total enterprise more secure and accountable.
Great. Karina, tell us what you're up to. Out of 1,000
So
minutes.
honored. I'm so honored to be on this call with all of you. So I'm Karina. I'm the CEO of Klever Compliance, and we stand up GRC COEs, Centers of Excellence, with kind of focusing on that entire flow of work for GRC and all of the competency areas, not just in IT, but also finance and legal and HR. We make sure that companies' posturing is very solid and reportable on their health of their GRC program. That's me.
Great. And Mike, out of Las Vegas, take it away.
Thank you, Garrett. Good to be here with everyone again for Audit Tuesday. So my company is Yastis. We're a cybersecurity consulting company here in Las Vegas. We help small and medium-sized businesses in the United States lower cyber risk and increase compliance. Most of my background is in the U.S. Department of Defense, started out in active duty 21 years ago, and just yesterday was the 21-year anniversary. So I got to have a little party for that at some point. It's been good. And during that time, I've also been an Air Force civilian for many years, a Air Force contractor for Lockheed Martin, and still serving part-time as a cyber operations officer. So I do need to give the disclaimer that anything said today is just my personal opinion and not gained from any government work. It's just from the news and just seeing what's going on day to day.
And I'm going to
Well
write
done, Mike.
disclaimer, probably Karina as well.
I disclaim too. Let's all be under disclaimer.
Just our opinions. In fact, I got a little intro. I was going to say that. Yeah, this is Garrett speaking as Garrett. Okay. Anyways, yeah, I'm Garrett Grayjack. I'm an identity guy with 14 patents. Well, it was 13, but now our marketing says make sure we say 14 because we got a new one on YouAttest.
Good for you.
In SSO, two-factor GRC, and now I run a governance company called YouAttest. Okay, let's jump into it. And since I'm born and raised outside Chicago, we'd like to get into controversy early. Let's go. Okay, so first of all, we all got political opinions. And as Karina jumped on the call and said, that's not what this call is about. What this call about is what are we going to do? We got some changes. How do we stay focused? What should we stay focused on? What is the focus? Okay, so that's what we're doing. And so the point of this call is to help two groups. It's to help the enterprises, the CISOs, the guys who actually have the day job of governance and security and compliance. Okay, and then also the vendors like YouAttest. Okay, what does matter? What is going to matter to those CISOs and those clientele? So that's the purpose of this. Okay. So let's get to the big elephant in the room, because I put this together and then I did research, which is, whatever, very college. Anyways, I had no idea that there was so much controversy around the CISA. I actually did not. Okay. I'm head down, writing patents, trying to make things work, dealing with identity attestations. And I found this whole controversy about the CISA, which, we've on this program, Audit Tuesdays, had a CISA representative on the show, and it was wonderful. We were talking about the zero trust maturity model and had a great time. Anyways, the controversy is on the $3 billion CISA, which is a cybersecurity infrastructure security agency that was created, of all people, Trump, back in 2018 from what used to be called the National Protection and Programs Directorate. See, Mike, see, Stacey, I can read acronyms too, just like Washington, D.C. I'm very proud of myself. Okay. The CISA objective, see, I know Mike and Stacey can read like acronyms, like to know them all, right? That's just part of living. Okay. Anyway, so the CISA objective is supposed to help government and non-governments in addressing cybersecurity issues. Okay, there's three things that I put to say that cause a bunch of controversy. The chair, back Chris Krebs in 2020, the first chair, he was fired by Trump after the election in 2020, okay, by not saying there was election fraud. And then in 2022, the Congress tried to pass a defund CISA by 25%. And then in 2023, CISA got hit by the House Judicial Committee on Selected Committee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. And they released an interim staff report declaring CISA expanded its mission to surveil and censor American speech on social media. They say they got involved in all the social media stuff and all that, and basically blocking certain speech and calling it misinformation. Anyways, so that's the background of a $3 billion agency that's supposed to protect the government and our own enterprises called the CISO. So, Stacey, what happens to CISA in 2025?
So, all right. So if I took out my my magic ball.
Exactly.
And do some predictions here. So a lot of things I wanted, going into 2025, we have a change of administration. So right now we're operating off of existing laws, directives. A lot of these things aren't in place. So there's a lot of speculation right now on what's going to change and what's going to happen. And as we all know, it's very difficult to change laws. Because literally it's an act of Congress, right? That we have to go to make some of the changes with laws, but directives can be pushed out a little bit more forthright. So those types of things, when you start speculating, what has the administration campaigned on? What has the administration started showing since the results of the election? And as far as who appointees and what have you. So one thing that we definitely know will happen is there will be a change in leadership in CISA, right? So there's going to be, that's already known. Unless something happens in the past few minutes, I haven't seen the latest appointee from perspective from that aspect, but they all still have to be confirmed. So those types of things, with any regime, with a change of leadership, there could be a change in the overall direction. There are some really great initiatives that are already underway. If certain things happen, like if there's a change in funding, then that's going to change some things that are being done. If CISA has a very, and again, like you said, Garrett, previously the function was being handled by NPPD. And also of previous administrators, we also had a cyber czar, right? So that position was also eliminated prior to CISA being created. But those types of things where what is going to happen, I can speculate. A lot may come through with a few changes in regulations. I do know from what's been heard, there's been talks of reducing some of the regulations, right? So even if we do that at a federal level, I'm not sure which ones, if funding changes. And again, like I said before, that's going to change some of the initiatives that are underway, because CISA provides a lot of things that, it's federally funded. So it's taxpayer dollars. So if that changes, then some of these free tools that are provided by CISA may not be able to be supported. But if there is, under the previous administration, the previous Trump administration, there was more money going towards defense and what have you. So if you look at it from that perspective, maybe there will be more funding from a cyber perspective, right? Because as we keep maturing and becoming more innovative, and the technology defense is really growing from a cyber perspective, not just necessarily boots on the ground. So there is that possibility that will be seen, and that's something that will be funded to help protect. So right now it's a ton of, I can't really give you a firm solution. I'm here watching like everyone else. I do know that there are state requirements that are going to stay in place. There are international requirements that a lot of people are, some come to when you're doing an international business, then a lot of the security measures and stuff that are in place still have to be happening. I do know there are other companies and what have you that are out here still looking at as trying to prevent some of the malicious activity in cybersecurity. So I'm not going to take all of our time. So back to you, Gary.
So Karina, anything you want to expand on this CISA? And Mike, I'll get you next. Oh, you're on muted, Karina.
Karina, you're muted.
There you go. Oh,
I'm sorry. I was going to say, let me bounce this one over to Mike because he's got more of a CISA perspective, I think, than I do specific CISA perspective.
Yeah, take it away, Mike.
Thanks, Karina and Garrett. Yeah, so I think we're not going to see CISA go away or anything like that, right? The Trump administration created CISA in 2018, so you obviously like the things you create. I think they just didn't like that it wasn't being used as intended and was potentially going against some of their political views or maybe personal opinions. But now that they're in full control of it, and Governor Kristi Noem is over the Department of Homeland Security, she's most likely going to pick a lead for CISA that's aligned with their views. And they have the lessons learned from last time. So they'll probably just, it'll be there active, well-funded, probably even more funded, right? Because I think President Trump, more than some, views cyber kind of like more of a criminal activity, right? More of like on the like day-to-day level, like stealing a car, or if a country is hacking the United States, that's more of a crime, right? Whereas some others might not view it as being so as bad, right? Because it's just you're on keyboard, right? People usually aren't getting hurt. So I think it will be taken very seriously. I think what will happen is the use of the NIST framework, which Trump promoted heavily in his first term by executive order, I think that'll remain in place with some enforcement, probably led by CISA, right? Especially for the critical infrastructure areas, right? Because we all know the NIST framework, it's voluntary, right? And last time the Trump administration said, you should use this. This time they might say, you need to use this, and CISA is going to verify you're using this. And he can incentivize behavior with tax credits, for example, or penalties, right? If a critical infrastructure agency is presented with these options, decides not to use the NIST framework, and something bad happens, it's kind of hard to defend against that, right? Unless they have an equivalent framework in place. So I think in that regard, President Trump and his administration will govern like he does in other areas, and just try to enforce, what he wants done. And I do think he will be especially intense in terms of election security, both before and after elections. And I think that's the extent of it. So I think to wrap it up, I think CISA will be here and maybe even grow.
And then
that's interesting.
Yeah,
Take it away,
even to add like a little bit, because I've definitely CISA will be here. The function of it, to me, it could possibly be expanded or moved and shifted, right? Because right now there's a lot of discussion of restructuring government. So I'm under the understanding that there are other laws that are in place, right? So you have FISMA that's in place that governs any information system that is either owned or operated by the government, or housing and using government information, right? So you have those laws that are still in place. But then you have all the other things that what CISA really gets into, which goes outside of, and I think Mike was talking about that a little bit, going outside of those that not necessarily are just federal agencies, but in all types of requirements from a private and public sector and those types of things, which have other regulations, government regulations as well that they're succumb to. So yeah.
So, team, and I'll let anyone grab this. I mean, I think the next in my brain would go straight off to NIST, because you mentioned NIST, you know, and we always map our product to NIST, CSF, the Cybersecurity Framework 1.1, 2.0. And of course, in your land out there, Stacey, everyone's has to follow 853, right? So what happens to NIST? Is there any talk, and what should the world know about, you know, the prioritization of NIST, the funding of NIST, the refocus of NIST? Or Karina, you want to tackle that first? Or
So let me I think try to kind of broaden look at a little bit more broad implications from a regulatory perspective, and of course a framework perspective, right? We have 800 171 within the CMMC landscape, and of course you know, contractors being required to pass that level 2 certification to do business with the government. I think very, very important. While we were on the phone, I just pulled up the HHS breach report. I'm going to remind everyone again, these are reported cases that are still open and under investigation, reported within the last 2 years. Today's number is 256,409,915 individuals affected by a breach in the US. Folks, this is 77% of the population, includes all of our children. Right. So we do have to think about those controls that really just basic governance controls in all of our companies, whether you're healthcare, whether you're banking, whether you're a critical infrastructure, according to the US government, right? Utility, gas, electric, whatever company you're at, do a very quick basic governance checklist. Whether or not the regulations out there change, and yes, they may influence us some, they're still written to be broadly applicable, so that when the auditor shows up at your firm, once you've done something wrong over and over again, they can actually point you at something. But those basic principles, whether you take them from ISO, you take them from NIST, you take them from a regulation, you take them from Sarbanes-Oxley if you're in finance, you have the Securities Exchange Commission requirements for a 4-day notification if you've got a breach. Drill that, right? Because what's happening is people at the SOC and the NOC are picking up the phone and calling Securities Exchange Commission, and they're protected by whistleblower laws because they know your legal department isn't going to be able to turn something around in a day. It's usually a 45-day window. So I'm going to implore everybody to please come back to their own environments and do a very good rational check of their GRC program and what they have in place right now and where those opportunities for fixes are.
yeah, and good point, Karina, because things like NERC-CIP for the energy, you know, compliance and all that, they ain't going anywhere. You know, that's going to, they're still mandated. If anything, it's going to be more. So yeah, real interesting. We had a good question on there, so I'm going to get to that one next. I'm real interested in anyone having opinions about HIPAA, right? So, you know, that's that drives a lot of the work that I've been doing, Karina, a lot of the work that you're doing, the healthcare or so. What do we see there? What is the any changes, or will it be more on that? Any thoughts on that? I'll let you take that. Karina, then maybe Mike.
So yes, I'm going to chime in with Stacey, and basically say, you know, we have the kind of charter of change, supposedly, that's coming to all of these entities, right? And that's kind of what the slingshot kind of threat has been all around. And
Yeah.
you know, with dead waste cut, I mean, we're all brainwashed by whatever channel we kind of subscribe to. So depending on what side of which channel you're subscribed to is kind of what is kind of the version you hear of this. But absolutely, I think it's important to really understand that HIPAA enforcement is very difficult to do with all of the healthcare that's out there, and that regulatory entity is really just that stick. And we need to be much more careful with our personal health information, electronic personal health information as an industry. And again, watch out for those basic core governance protocols that you may have in your company. Stacey, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
Hey, Mike, since you're in the heart of darkness on that one, how do you see what's the talk around CMMC, basically for defense contractors? What do they see the changes in that world?
Is under the new administration, I don't think it'll change that much.
Because they just had a big final ruling, and
Yeah.
it's pushed out that it's going to start enforcing, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
CMMC
So
will.
it's going to roll out over 4 years. It's not going to be going full speed on 100% until 2028, right? So the final rule takes effect next month, starting in January. CMMC level 1 and 2 organizations are going to have to do self-assessments. Then they add on a little bit each year to kind of keep it manageable. I haven't heard it, but if I could think of any change that the Trump administration would implement, it would be maybe a waiver of some requirements for the smaller companies, right? Because I talked to a lot of companies that are really small and they're scared to death of CMMC. They're like, there's no way I can do this. Like, I was literally contacted one time by this guy. He said he owns a boat company that he either makes the whole boat or parts of boats for the Navy. And they started telling him about CMMC. He goes, we don't do anything for cybersecurity. I don't know how we would do this. But I do think it's needed. The Trump administration, the first time around, did show that they take cybersecurity very seriously. So CMMC in itself, I don't think it's going anywhere. They might find some ways to maybe expedite the process a little bit more, but that's about it.
And I'm just going to chime in. Yeah, I'm pretty much second on that aspect, especially from supporting Department of Defense. So, I mean, the biggest thing under that, if DoD decides to change the direction that they want to go within CMMC, I think that's where that's going to lie from that aspect, because of course that's going to follow the directive, right? So you have you have the agency, you have the organization that's been assigned to do all the certifications and authorizations and reviews and assessments and what have you, and training and what have you. But then you have, which actually comes down with DoD that makes the decisions on in the finalizations, which is why it got delayed and where we are now. But yeah, I think still want to keep going forward with where it is. There's a lot of work that's already been there. And that was a good point that Mike made about more of the exceptions. So, I mean, doing a lot of work with the government, a lot of things that happen, if things are needed, the government doesn't, sometimes with all the regulations and all the requirements, it kind of looks like it's, it's almost disenfranchises, right, the little guy. And you don't want to, the government is not, the aim for the government is not to do that, right? So they do have programs and stuff. So those are good things to look into, which is one of the things, one of why there is that the DFARS and the CMMC was to not over restrict what the government actually has to do. When you look at the directives, and Mike, the requirements if it's a government system. So those types of things.
I want to add really quickly, a lot of regulation, people are kind of abrasive towards them and see them in a very restrictive way. But we also have to acknowledge the fact that there's a lot of data that gets lost by contractors relinquishing confidential data out there, right? A lot of the reasons why regulations happen is to protect data, is to protect consumers in many cases, right? And so although they are restrictive, very many of them do encourage you to appropriate to your actual operations. And I always use the goat milk example, right? Pharma company, 21 CFR, they have to adhere to that. But 135, 115 says if you make goat milk ice cream, you have to use goat milk. So we have to actually know our regulations for our industries and say, well, this particular piece right here just doesn't apply to me. Don't go tracking it. Don't go trying to find evidence for it. acknowledge it and say, you know what, this doesn't have anything to do with me, and put it away. Because when we spend these endless hours spinning, trying to fulfill requirements that have nothing to do with this, that is the bigger issue of checkbox compliance. We need to really bring that down to our actual operations. And just for a moment, think about costs, right? 10 people, not exorbitant. Let's say you've got 10 people in your company, let's say $50 an hour, fully loaded, meaning insurance, bennies, payroll, PTO, all of it, right? Not a high salary. 10 people who update policies, gather evidence, interface with the auditors, do mitigation, all of those fun compliance things. If we take 10 people at $50 fully loaded, that's over $1 million annual spend, folks. Now, how many controls are we actually having them work on as part of the compliance program that relates to your specific operations?
You got it. And there's something you said that it's really relevant, because someone hit me with this, and I'm like, I'll just throw out some stuff. I mean, there's that, new commission. It's going to be what? It's the Department of Government Efficiency, right? Doge, and not the coin, not the dog. So, and that's going to be led by, right? My kids were really into Doge. Led by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. And I said that because I wanted to be able to say that, Ramaswamy. So that I did that well. So see, I practiced. All good. So anyways, they're talking about cutting 75% of departments, but there is one thing that's relevant. I was seeing it because someone asked me about that. Well, what's going to happen to regulations? I go, I don't know. We do a lot of work for PCI DSS. That doesn't have anything to do with the government. I just finished our SOC 2 Type 2, which I think anyone that's doing business with, a cloud company should make sure they have one of those, right? Let alone high trust, doesn't have to do with the government, let alone, we'll go into this later, what the Euros do, with EU, DORA, and GDPR, et cetera. So I would just have to think, Stacey and Karina, I don't see that much change in the, basically the cyber regulations, especially with the focus is, I like what you said, Mike, is that the new guy, he really thinks the cyber is cyber hacking. So, we're going to be stay focused on those. I do have a question though, Stacey, I'll give it to you first. What do you think about liabilities? What do you think? Because we're going to get into some stuff that the Supreme Court brought up, but liabilities. Do you think they're going to keep the liabilities? And Karina, if you have any thoughts on that as well, on lawsuits or whatever, basically said, your PHI was stolen or your PII was stolen, and you think those adjust those penalties on breaches, et cetera?
Stacey,
Are they going to?
yeah, you take that one first.
I'll start. So you're talking about adjusting penalties. So some of the things that you're talking about are part of law, right? So if you don't do X, then this is what you're subject to. So then of course laws can be interpreted. Laws can be look at where does liability fall. That's where you start getting into the little bit more of the gray areas and what have you. But there will still be, that's kind of when they start putting things in place. If you don't do this, this is what happens. And the best way to do that from that standpoint is to a lot of times hit the pocket, right? So don't do this. I always tell people are not going to comply with certain laws and regulations just because they want to. They just don't want the consequences. And I'll give a perfect example because you mentioned PCI. There were, companies in your area, Mike, in Vegas, that chose not to do that because they made plenty of money and they could pay the fine. So it's still going to be there. It's not going to go away. Maybe what constitutes or what makes you liable, that may augment it. And you mentioned Doge. And to my understanding, I think they're still trying to keep that outside of the government to regulate. I don't believe they want to put that in act as a government agency. But
no, that Stacey, I just read that today. That basically, hey, it's not like these guys are head of the OMB, whatever. This is an outside agency that will make recommendations, et cetera. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
so
those
but
insiders
yes,
like Stacey know that. Yeah, there you go.
So yeah, so that's one of the ones where it goes back to kind of what we all have been saying, whoever heads certain agencies, right? So a lot of these agencies are appointees. And the appointees can go a certain level. There's ways that you can get into funding and appropriations and stuff like that that comes out of Congress. Even you mentioned NIST a little bit earlier, so their funding currently for the fiscal year 2025 is less than what they had for fiscal year 2024. So those types of things that you're looking at. And then I guess we'll circle back around to the liability for Karina.
No, fun.
Yeah, take it away.
So on liability, a few words of caution for companies out there. The normal sequence right now is if you're going to go get cyber insurance, you get a questionnaire back and you pass that over to IT and you give a directive to the IT folks, make sure this is all filled out. And they fill everything out. And just very recently, there was a situation where the IT guy said, yes, we have MFA. Submitted the questionnaire back to the insurance company. Insurance company went ahead and approved them. They're paying a premium on it. But turns out that when the breach happened, it didn't happen in the area of the infrastructure that included the MFA. Therefore, the entire breach was completely declined. And they were unable to receive any money for the tragedy that they actually experienced. Folks, 80% of small companies who do get attacked close because they cannot recover from a cyber attack. So my word of caution is please be really careful in thinking that because you have a cyber insurance policy, you're going to be totally good and recovered after an incident. You won't be. There are people who have different philosophies about this. They're like, they'll write articles about, well, it's an event, it's an incident, it's an occurrence, it's a thing. I don't care what you call it. You're right, your infrastructure has been literally breached and you've either lost data or something bad happened. These events really all are on you because you need to be putting up a good governance program in place, whether you have insurance or not. Right. This is the equivalent of saying, I'm going to leave my high-end car in a really bad area with all the windows rolled down and the doors unlocked, but I got insurance. So I'm good. Nothing's going to happen to my car. It's just as silly, right? So I think that's point number one. Point number two, I encourage you to please be careful with your vendor contracts and really truly understand what they're saying. Many contracts are written from a complete CYA perspective, folks. So make sure that you know what that vendor is doing with your data and ask those three basics, right? Your NIST basics: data transportation, data storage, data processing, NIST V2, and put governing controls around those elements of the service that you are receiving from this person or this entity or this company you're in business with. Mike, do you have something to add? We were just talking about this, I think last week or this week.
No, you make some good points. Go back to Garrett's question though, like how are they going to enforce it, like penalties and stuff like that? I think big tech better be very careful with cyber and privacy related matters because there's already been that back and forth that experience, and numerous Republicans have said as much, like they're going to watch them closer, whatever. For smaller businesses, I don't think the penalties will be that much more intense. I could see them maybe limiting their ability to do work with the government. And as President Trump and Elon Musk have alluded to under DOGE, there's going to be more clarity for the public to see who's doing the right thing. So maybe kind of like how the Office of Civil Rights publishes the breach stats, as Karina pointed out today and on our prior event on LinkedIn a couple weeks back. They put it out there, right? They put out the name of the company. In the case of HIPAA, it was the medical institutions, the general cause of the breach, and the number of people impacted, right? And that can have one, it can better inform the consumers, and it can have business ramifications, right? Because You might get less clients if you're known to not be able to protect data appropriately. You may not get that buyout offer. You may not be able to fundraise if it's proven that you can't do cybersecurity and compliance properly, because when you don't do those things properly, there's probably other leaks in the ship as well.
Yeah, great points. Okay, there's something that when I was doing research for this, I came across some writings around this and said basically what the writings were saying is, things like CMMC, that's been, in progress for years. No one sees any change. It's been years you saying, okay, let's get the 2.0. Now we got the 4-year plan coming out. Great. There's, good reasons. The big change people see that follow this really closely, especially around the lawsuits and the regulations, is the Supreme Court rulings of recent. One being it was the EPA versus West Virginia, and the other one was one against Chevron. Where basically both rulings what were stated is that the regulatory agencies overextended their mandated and basically over interpreted laws. Okay. And said they, basically came up with their own guidelines. The West Virginia one was like, hey, you only can have this much coal burned and, et cetera. So I like what you said about, both HIPAA and both the CMMC. This is in law now. This is not a interpretation of the law by a agency. So that to me it seems like any writings, any pitherings about, well, we're not going to be able to, or we don't have to look at our regulations, is just silly because it's in law. I mean, would you agree with that, Karina and Stacey?
Well, I guess so. One of the I guess I would go with that with like interpretation of laws.
Yes.
The court want to interpret the laws, right? So when organizations or agencies try to put out, because you mentioned Chevron, that they're going to their interpretation sort of is law. That kind of goes against the judiciary system, as far as I'm concerned, because that's just not why the laws are there or how the laws should be treated, right? And that's what the ruling came back with. So that would be my perspective.
Yeah. But my point was, I don't think we should overread that, right? I mean, that because, you seem to be agreeing, Karina, because there's things stipulated that you should be having this, right? And that's actually in the laws and in the mandates. And then there are, of course, the overreaching ones where I just don't, I don't think we should let up our foot on the pedal when it comes to cybersecurity and think that, oh, okay, this new administration, they're going to let us do anything. We're not going to get fined. We're all good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that would be the biggest mistake. And I think that is exactly what I'm saying is, I don't want to call this noise, right? There are things that are happening in the background that will influence our operations. They will impact how we make decisions. They will play a part in considerations that we may have within our companies for budget, for resources, for all kinds of very important elements of us running our business. None of these things need to take away the fact that we need to have a solid GRC program in our own company that has the basic, I'll walk into a company and I'll say, where's your data? And I get a blank look. And then I call them once a month. Did you find it? Did you find it? Did you find it? Did you find it? And then 6 months later, they're like, well, maybe you can come back. I think we kind of found most of it. Oh, okay. So I kind of come on back in, but here's the problem. They're encrypting publicly available information. Why? Why do you like to burn money? Because essentially that's what you're doing. Why aren't you purging it? Why aren't you getting rid of it? Right? So we need to be talking about those basic data classification principles. Where's your golden egg? Any company should know where this is. Right. And then the protections need to be different for your golden egg versus your publicly available information. right? Access controls, we're on the phone with YouAttest right now, right? Where are those logical points coming in from? HR? Do you have role-based privileges? Right, that a tool like YouAttest will come in and say, okay, I'm going to make this really easy for you. Here's who has access to what based on the type of data that we have in our ecosystem. When we're talking about system to system access, folks, APIs are one of our most dangerous parts of our environment right now, right? Because we set that API up years ago, and it's still sending data. We haven't updated the password for it, but it's still sending data.
With a
No
stagnant
one knows
account
where
that
it
no one's
goes,
looked at in years. Yep. I love
right?
it.
No one knows where
Yeah.
it's going. So, I mean, destruction principles, retention principles, least privilege permissions, purposefulness, data minimization, all of these basic principles rely on data classifications. Most companies, question number one, where's your data?
Yep. And then a lot of times, so even with other administrative changes and what have you that come forward, it doesn't stop holding companies and agencies and organizations accountable for good cyber hygiene, right? So I'm gonna say that across the board. So
Yeah.
a lot of times with your regulations and laws and stuff like that, that kind of helps you and it gives you direction, right? So even we talked about NIST guidelines and those types of things. Those give organizations that may not have the expertise in-house, those that want to do that need to show their insurers that they're doing their due diligence. So that those types of guidelines, and I've gone places and you'll have, they have their expertise, and some of them like, hey, during the pandemic, we've got a transition. We didn't really do a lot of remote. So how are we doing this? I'm like, well, here's a perfectly good guideline that tons of people, whether they were government, academia, as well as public and private sector. That's one of the reasons why I absolutely adore NIST, because they get everyone's opinion on it. They're also up the street from me. But so those types of things, we're still, regardless of the changes, we are still held accountable. And sometimes there's legal repercussions that come behind it. Sometimes there's reputational. For instance, certain things can be catastrophic to a business. So even going on to what Karina was saying, like you need to expand. I'm always a firm of your exercises and incident response and business continuity and those types of things to make them real. Bring in your executives, bring the C-levels in, and sometimes bring it up in attention to the board. And that way, I've been in rooms with C-level folks, and they're folks responsible for insurance. I'm like, well, if this were to happen, are we covered by insurance? And nobody knew the answer. So that was a follow-up. That was a takeaway. Let's go figure that out, because this could actually happen, and you don't want to be at that. And then even the cyber insurance, because of what's happening, and as we're growing and there's more cyber attacks and stuff like that, it's going to be costly for them. So they're going to hold people to more stringent requirements. And Karina already hit on that a little bit, and Mike as well. So they're going to hold you to more stringent requirements on what you need to do, what you need to demonstrate to make sure that you're still covered. They don't want to just keep coming out the pocket because it's expensive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And basically what we're agreeing on is that, I mean, the best practices are still the best practices. NIST isn't going anywhere. Their frameworks are excellent and people are using them. And
yeah, the standard of peanut butter, they're not going anywhere.
Right. And what I get is that the laws are on the books. The breaches, fines for PHI, PII, and now what's being enforced and has been enforced by the CMMC on the DIB infrastructure. So that's not going anywhere. Okay, there is one thing. If anyone's any thoughts about the SEC, any thoughts about the SEC? Go for it,
Sorry,
Karina.
I have a very strong thought about the SEC.
Go for it.
As part of your DRBCP, please drill those filings. I've said it before, but they keep happening, and the SOX and the
Those are
NOC
ones buried themselves because of their 10Ks and their 10Qs, etc.
Yeah,
Yep.
the AKs and right. So
Yeah,
the SOX and the NOCs are calling SEC directly. that's all I've been seeing right now. A lot of is people basically using the Whistleblower Act to their advantage.
Good point.
And there was a recent whistleblower report that came out, which was very interesting. If anyone needs a resource, please get a hold of me, or to see that report, get a hold of me. But Securities Exchange Commission filings, the liability that we're seeing on the CISOs that are shifting a lot of roles, I think that's a very big conversation, because a lot of CISOs are in their roles because they were very strong technically, and they don't want to take the liability of an entire GRC program on their shoulders, and basically be held liable for it should something go wrong, because they are many times not in a position where they can influence change in their company. And just like Stacey said, get in front of the board if you can, but not everyone is able to do that.
Good points. Anything to add there, Stacey or Mike, on SEC? I mean, because they have an impact on cyber. I was talking to some a guy out of New York. He said his law firm, and I can't make this up, had a bet every November on which company was going to be. Okay, yes, and to make an impact, to basically enforce their cyber mandates and the 404, and make sure that people aren't ignored, and etc. And they I did a bunch of webinars earlier this year about the SolarWinds, and it was pretty succinct on pulling out the information that was documented there in 10Ks and AQs or whatever, and then going into what was reality. And that's what the audits were about. And I personally don't think there's going to be much change in that, but if anyone has anything to add, go for it.
See if Mike has anything on that, or.
Yeah, so with the SEC, maybe they named a new head of the SEC, maybe they didn't. The outgoing head of the SEC, he was kind of, some in the crypto community said he didn't give clarity on things. I know in terms of cybersecurity, it's largely based on making a public disclosure if you're a public company, and it's related to materiality, right? So they kind of put it in the hands of the company to say, you have to report the breach if you think it'll have a material impact on earnings or maybe livelihood, right? Like if you have such a terrible cyber incident that's going to make you bankrupt, of course you're going to have to disclose that. So I think the SEC will kind of streamline it a little bit, and instead of saying report it if you think it's important, they could just give some guidelines, like if you have a breach that impacts over 1,000 people, then you have to disclose it. And then that'll just give a little bit more firmness, while also allowing them to lower the regulatory burden, right? Because having 100 compliance items isn't necessarily better than having 10 compliance items if those 10 are the right ones. So I think they may not succeed, but I think they'll at least try to do that sort of thing at the SEC.
I like that. Make Karina smile, because that's one of her slides. That's all over. Like, keep things. Let's make it succinct. Okay, last one I'm going to bring up is because we live in a global world, and as much as we think we affect everyone's life, well, we do, but other people affect our lives too. And I've been doing a lot of talks and a lot of stuff about EU's GDPR, which anyone is doing business with, and how do you not, right? And now EU DORA. And I'm a huge believer in every reaction has a reaction. Because a lot of, especially when you have someone that likes to piss people off, right? They will say, okay, you don't believe in me? Well, I'm going to do this. And I'm going to leave it at this, because it's complete conjecture. I mean, the EU has been pretty adamant and pretty detailed. If you guys go, I did a bunch of webinars on DORA, the Digital Resilient Act, okay, which is directed right at the finance. So if you're doing finance in the EU, you've got to follow real succinct, real detailed guidances and compliance on your operations, okay? So I don't see any of that being lessened. And in fact, since I believe in a react and an act react world, anyone have any opinions on what we can expect out of the EU's reaction?
To our change in regime.
Yeah, change regime, change of any attitude towards guidance and regulations.
It's funny. So I'll go back to when GDPR was coming out before it became official, and I
Right.
was doing training. I wanted to get training from people in the EU, right? So I did an EU training. And a lot of things when you're looking at it is some of the reactions were if you look like, why is the US not included in certain aspects? And it was off of the US is regulating everyone. So we're going to have something, and literally this is what they told us in training. So it's a chance to make sure that you hold the US to the same standards that they're holding everyone else to. And not for them to just be the US and get away with stuff and kind of really push the requirements out there from an EU perspective and international perspective, saying, no, we're going to have requirements that you have to adhere to from that aspect. I think the same thing is it's similar with DORA, again, it's no really impact being an EU, being in the EU, it doesn't really regard of what we're doing over here. It's things that they're going to say, this is what you're going to have to do if you want to do this, or you're going to get these types of
Yeah, if you want to do business, is what everyone has a branch, everyone's like GDPR.
Yeah.
Are you holding EU citizen data? Of course we are, So
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't think
Right.
it's going to get more rigid or less. They're going to keep
Okay.
going on in the path that they're going. But yeah, Karina, I see you smiling.
So I had a recent customer say to me, well, in Europe, it seems like they just make decisions and they make laws, and we're kind of like wiffly waffly, and can't seem to really decide on anything. So we kind of look to EU to give us some definitive direction, because with a lot of things, GDPR, EU AIA, right? We're seeing a lot of decisions being made, and with DORA as well, by the EU, and then we choose to either adopt or not. Now, leading edge, of course, on consumer privacy, come back to the same question: where's your data? When companies say, oh, we don't have a way to actually enact a consumer privacy request, and California has a 45-day fulfillment, and Tennessee has 30, and Iowa has 60. Like, how do I even keep all of this straight? We haven't heard at all about the ARA, right? The American Privacy Rights Act, APRA, since last October. Really, we haven't heard anything. So all of these things from a consumer perspective are best practices overseas. And then, of course, Privacy Shield, fell apart. So this was this whole big thing for the data transfers in between the lake, right? Opposite sides of the lake. So I think that we should continue to look at DORA's recommendations and adopt some of the enforcement, right? So we don't have very much enforcement here, because it feels like we have some of these guidelines and rules, but there's nobody out there to say, here's how we don't have enough enforcement, especially for consumer privacy. And I think it's tragic, especially with CCPA back in version 1, HIPAA and GLBA are actually excluded out of CCPA, which most people don't even know about, right? So I think we should continue to take a lot of our direction from EU, and we can grow into them once we get the basics right. So again, I'm gonna harp in on let's get the basic GRC principles in place at all of our
Right.
companies, and then let's grow to these standards.
There you go. I think that's a good way to wrap this up. All right, so let's just do that. Stacey, tell the wonderful audience how you can be reached.
I can be reached on LinkedIn. I can also be reached at info@cycam.io. Yeah.
There you go, Stacey Cameron and Karina Klever.
I am also on LinkedIn, and I am at Karina at clevercompliance.com.
Happiness. Mike, take it away.
Yeah, also on LinkedIn, like I am right now with you fine people, and post every day. So if you'd like to connect on there or at least see some cybersecurity and compliance related content, you can search for my name as it's spelled here. It's Andrewes. Why not have two E's if you can instead of just one? You can also email me at mike@yastis.com. That's YASTIS.
There you go. And I think I want to thank everyone. I think we did a great job there. You know, I don't think people are going to be protesting or burning down universities or anything over this. So we did a great job. Oh, good. Told a story about this before. Anyways, we're YouAttest. We care about identity compliance, and that's in all the regulations. That's in the EU DORA. That's in the GDPR. That's in the NIST 153. That's in PCI DSS, identity attestation. We've automated, we made it simple, right? All the wonderful guests are trained on this, okay? So you can reach us at youattest.com or just email us at info@youattest.com or hit me on LinkedIn. Other than that, great. That was a lot of fun. This is a great panel. Thanks, y'all.